Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. I'm your host, Michael Dargie. The Rebel Rebel is a podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. If you're a rebel or you know a rebel, why don't you head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and fill out the guest request form. We'd love to learn more about you, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next guest on our show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just that little thing helps us out so much, and we certainly do appreciate it, and we notice every single one. Or head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and buy yourself a super cool shirt or buy one for a friend. There's even a coffee mug there you can get. And a huge thanks to the team at Make More Creative for making this show possible. On today's show, I'm really excited to introduce you to Jeff Swystun. Jeff is an ex-ad guy from Madison Avenue. And now he's a writer. He's a ghostwriter, but he's got his own books. We talk about branding, storytelling, ads that work, ads that don't work, some really crazy history about something maybe you don't think a lot about anymore, but that is TV dinners. He's written a book on that, and you're going to love it. And I'm sure you're going to love him. Jeff is a great guy. Please enjoy the show. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dargie, and across the planet from me is Jeff Swystun. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for joining me. Now, I say across the planet because Canada is huge.
That's right.
And you're on the other side of the country from me. Where are you located right now?
So I'm north of Montreal in a ski resort area called Mont Tremblant. And, I agree with you. It's kind of funny about geographies. The other day or weekend decided, let's go to Montreal. And, that sounds like a daunting little trip for us. They're in 80 minutes, it was no problem at all. Downtown Montreal.
Yeah.
But Canada can be so expansive. I remember traveling to Europe as a neophyte young guy, 92 Olympics, skiing in northern Italy. And a friend of mine, we agreed to go over to France. Yeah. We thought, oh, my God, we're going to another country. We've got to do this and this. We arranged planes, trains, and automobiles, and it took us 45 minutes to get there.
It's like no time whatsoever.
Yeah.
Well, I rode my motorcycle. I might have shared this with you last week, but I rode it from Ottawa to Calgary.
Right.
And it took, so it was a 4-day trip. 3 of those days were Ontario.
Yeah, isn't that something? Yeah, it goes on and on. But when you hit the prairies, though, how was that?
Oh, it was great. It was cruise control. But I mean, I really like when you're in Ottawa, I mean, really close to Montreal, or I guess you're close to Montreal, like right up close to Quebec.
Correct.
And what a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, you're talking about the Gatineau Hills and all of that. Yeah, that's a beautiful spot, and lots of attractions there, and really nice for folks in Ottawa. They're just outside the country. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, isn't that something? Anyway, so Jeff, it is so great having you on the show because I mean you are you're a man of many talents, first of all, but you also there's a spark in my heart because you're a brand guy.
Right.
And I thought maybe what we could do is sort of catch the audience up with, let's talk about what Jeff's doing now.
Sure.
Then I want to go back in time to figure out what it is that drove you to do this thing that you're doing, and then go forward in time to what's happening next.
Wow. We're going to really time travel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Good. So currently it's kind of a mix of two things going on professionally, and it's a mix of professional and enjoyment. So yeah, I do the branding and marketing thing, and I do that across industries. And I've been doing that on my own after leaving Madison Avenue for 10 years. Actually, today was a bit of a milestone. The second client I got after hanging up my own shingle, we had a call today and said, do you know it's our 10-year anniversary?
No
and
way.
It just blew me away. The CEO remembered the actual day, and we agreed to a new project today. So I thought, well, that's fantastic. I'm really blessed that 10 years on that we're still, working together. Done a ton of brand work for them.
That's great.
So it's branding, marketing, really at the strategic level. I don't get into the nitty-gritty tactics. I'm really forming the brand strategy, the marketing strategies, campaigns. And, I've been really fortunate to work across industries and across geographies, from consumer products to professional services firms. Actually, it's kind of ironic. So I come from advertising and big branding firms, And about 70% of my clients are advertising agencies and consulting agencies. And they call me in because I have just this interesting, objective, but deeply informed look at that particular segment of business.
Interesting. Can you give me a sort of a snapshot of what that means?
Sure. Yeah. So let's take this 10-year client that I've had. They asked me 10 years ago, they were wanting to change their name for real business purposes, not just to refresh and be cool. And I worked with them from the top down of establishing who they are, what they do, because oftentimes the people who are working in businesses are in the weeds every day, and their business has evolved, but their description of the business, their branding and packaging of the business hasn't evolved with the times. So they're actually talking about themselves 2 iterations ago.
Right.
I come in, and with really my greatest strength is objectivity, and now that's born upon a bunch of experience, but it's coming in and just looking at things fresh and saying, guys, have you thought about this? Let me compare you to what's going on elsewhere, or to benchmarks and best practices, to your competitors. And we come out with this. I usually write a brand story, and this is where my worlds are colliding now. I used to write really long epics, and oh my God, it was like Beowulf's I was writing for business that no one would read, right? I learned my lesson. I was writing 2,000, 3,000 word tomes on these, on what the business should be from a branding perspective and how it should be articulated to the right audiences. And those have been really carved back to about 500-600 words, but they're unbelievably succinct, but yet impactful. And every sentence can actually be a campaign. Every sentence can be, a website. Like it's really informed. It's really delivered with a powerful punch. And that's translated itself into writing as another form of income and enjoyment. So I'm a ghostwriter as well, primarily for businesses and CEOs. I've guided over 10 books from concept to shelf.
Wow.
Some have been very good bestsellers, and others are, what they set out to be, brochures for a company, brochures for the CEO. And there's nothing wrong with that. It establishes them as a thought leader, and it grows their awareness. And I just recently published my second book myself.
Congratulations.
So I really had to explore this terrain of traditional publishing to assisted self-publishing to self-publishing. There's so much going on in this industry, and it's easy to get tripped up and bogged down. So I wrote a marketing book about 5 years ago called Why Marketing Works, and I based that on 7 what I think are timeless principles, and that's sort of been borne out. The book continues to sell, and people look at it, and though the cases get a little dusty, but not too much so, they're timeless as well. And then I wrote a screwball, I don't know what you call it, pop culture history. We spoke about it when we first met.
I was gonna prompt you for this one because.
Okay, well, no prompting at all, so you can tell I'm a marketer. I was just attracted to the quirkiness of the subject. So for listeners, it's a history, but not a history of TV dinners. And really what it is, it does tell that history and frozen meals right up to today, especially through COVID with meal delivery and all these things that are basically, cousins or children of the original Swanson TV dinner.
Right.
But the book, it just went in so many different directions. It talks about the family unit and eating at home and how that's fallen apart, that 30% of homes in Britain don't even have a dining table anymore, a dining room table. People are eating in front of screens, eating at staggered times. So it explores that. It explores food waste. Now, believe me, this is an uplifting, cheery book. A very nostalgic one that provides, let's say, comfort reading with your comfort food. And, I have some funny theories. There's the origin story of the TV dinner. That has been recycled and due to the internet sort of retold time and time again. So it's become accepted lore. But I actually disabuse that history and come up with what I think is the real originator of the TV dinner. And, it's got an interesting history to it even before Swanson debuted, and then everyone followed Swanson. And I make some interesting observations. I think the bento box could be considered the first TV dinner. I'm sorry, I'm talking so much.
This is This is great. This is why you're here.
Okay.
To talk about this stuff. I had, so I grew up just outside of Toronto, and I was a Leafs fan for so many years. Like my formative years were Toronto Maple Leafs, Daryl Sittler, Borja Salming, Mike Palmateer, like Tiger Williams. And I want to say that was the Swanson Hungry Man dinner had Lanny McDonald, I think, tearing the door off of the freezer. Daryl Sittler grab it. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Daryl Sittler and those guys eating Hungry Man dinners back then.
So they would have been, they used in the United States for Hungry Man, Mean Joe Green. And they probably absolutely replicated the same commercial, because Mean Joe tears the, the top freezer door off as well. And, he was supposed to really lift the sales of the product, because he'd come off that very famous Coke ad, about where he throws the jersey to the kid who had given him the Coke.
Yeah.
After he'd come off the gridiron, all sweaty and injured. Yeah. He didn't do as well for Swanson as he did for Coca-Cola, but the notion was there. It was fun that it was a big appetite stuff. And there were a couple of competitors. Banquet came out with the Man Pleaser, which had its own connotations, I believe.
So subtle.
Yeah, that was. I think they sold more T-shirts with the ironic notion of Man Pleaser on it than they did actual TV dinners. But it's hilarious history.
What do you think and this is a weird question to ask, but what do you think? Is it the advertising that drove Swanson over the top? Like, because they're the only ones I think of when I think of TV dinners.
It's a fantastic question, and one that I don't specifically answer in the book, but I've formed an opinion since. First off, I think the timing was just perfect for Swanson. In addition to a bunch of stuff on the business front going on, we had women re-entering the workforce like they had done during World War II when the men were off to fight. Yeah. And then when the men came home, the society basically pushed women back into those traditional roles. But because they'd had a taste of freedom making their own money, that bubbled up over the next 5 to 8 years when Swanson debuted in 1953. So they were entering the workforce. They had families. They needed something in the freezer. That was a big factor. People, really behind a TV dinner is three things. It's really ease, convenience, and speed. Yeah. And believe it or not, people's lives, the iconic 50s or what we romanticize, it was busy times. It was stressful times. They were living under, bomb shelters were being built, right? There were more bomb shelters in America than backyard swimming pools at one point. Wow. There was the notion of mortgages and got to keep up with the Joneses. I tell an interesting story. It blew me away. Like, you kind of get the sense that, they were having some martinis and beers in the backyard, but times were idyllic. It was a great economic time for people. Yeah. There was this pill called Milltown that debuted, a kind of a barbiturate, and I'm not good on drugs at all. I don't know much about them at all, but this was a prescribed drug that took off like you wouldn't believe. Like something like 20 million Americans tried Milltown. What? Milton Berle espoused it on a show. He told Elvis Presley, "You don't need a girlfriend, you need Milltown." There were Milltown cocktails where you would replace an olive in a martini with a Milltown pill.
What?
Absolutely, wild stuff. So my point being is we think of happy days and everything was cool and we're going to get a malt at the drive-in or drive-through or drive-up, I should say. And really, people were stressed and they were time-pressed like we are today. They were searching for relaxation and the TV hitting at the same time. All of these events just conspired in the right way to take Swanson from a test of 20,000 dinners that sold in 3 months. The next year they sold 10 million. The year after that, they sold 25 million. Oh. People were looking for this easy, convenient, fast, dinner placebo or substitute, whatever you want to call it, facsimile. Right. And they, people literally ate it up.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. So let's go, let's slide backwards before, inside Jeff's head, something happens and he's just like, I need to write this book.
Yeah. What happened inside Jeff's head, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. Some aren't good.
So how did we get here? Like, what is it that made you decide?
even my marketing book was almost probably 30% of history. What was the germ of that book? I came across a poem from like 1595 that was about going to the market. And there wasn't a ton of research on it. What I was to piece together was it was one of the first published pieces of poetry, so literally in a book form, but it had been something crisscrossing Europe across cultures, languages, territories. And this poem was basically a how would I say it, like a guide on how to go to a market, not get ripped off, how to, haggle for yourself, how to do it. And parents were actually reciting this poem to their kids to train them to be good consumers.
What?
Oh, it blew me away. Like anything in my career, you can take and find in the local farmers market. Everything is born from the local farmers market. Wow. So that was the germ for that book, where I was just like, wow, I think marketing's cool, new, sexy, and we got tech, and wow, this is fantastic. And now, AI to social media to performance marketing. I'll tell you, someone buying 13 ears of corn at the farmer's market is actually wrapped in that transaction as everything that's happening today. So it's really cool when you dissect it and bring it back.
I love it.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess that's an interesting jump off point is, I mean, you mentioned AI and all this crazy stuff that's happening right now, but does it all just come back to it's transactional? It's somebody buying a thing to perform a thing or to do a thing, whether it's to feed or whether it's to help.
Yeah, it's deeply psychological, and it's a division between our wants and our needs. Always, marketing is basically a psychological study of wants and needs.
Yeah.
So we saw some, and that can be highly irrational, right? I wrote a treatise, not necessarily a book, and it's on customer behavior, consumer behavior, and I called it, rationally irrational and rationally irrational, because we mix the two things up. We want that big TV. What are the considerations that go into buying that new flat screen? I need toilet paper. What are my considerations in buying that? Right. And we saw that, exuberance or irrational stuff going on during COVID, right? Where there was a scarcity aspect that drove so much of that incomprehensible behavior. So, I think even when you apply all the toys, tech, and tools that we have today, marketing boils down to understanding motivation, and, sort of directing the story of your product, of your service, back to my brand strategy stuff, in such a way that the prospective buyer can see themselves in the story.
Well,
and doing that in a cool way.
Yeah, and this is what I guess what I'd like to drive to also is that it is about the person that's buying. The hero of the story is the one who's, in it, who's, making that choice to buy the TV dinner or making that choice to buy the whatever. They're the hero. It's somewhat brand agnostic, so long as the brand is there to show them the way.
Yes, exactly right. And, about 15 years ago, I got excited about branding again. I've gone through my peaks and valleys in career, which everyone does, and people started talking about brand archetypes and the hero in the story, even the hero's journey. And for listeners who are unaware, but there's only about 6 or 7 stories that have ever been written. We just take different forms of them and extrapolate them out over different mediums, and from stage plays to the binging show that you're watching on Netflix. But there's literally 7 stories in the world. But then there's these archetypes, and I don't necessarily subscribe to them. I like the construct because I'm methodology driven myself. I like to have a sense of order in my crazy creative chaos. Yeah. But so you have. In branding for a while, it was, you have the rebel, and we talk about olden days, that'd be Marlboro cigarettes with the cowboy. It would be Harley Davidson, and that sort of thing. And I think things got a little bit too confused. We started taking, nonfiction brands into fiction territory, and that was a little bit too blurring of the lines. Really, when it comes down to a good brand story, how I judge mine and others is, did it give people the right information to make the best decision in an entertaining way? Because that's really what marketing's all about, is giving people the information to make an informed decision. And what's marketing at the end of the day? Entertainment.
Right.
It really is. It really is, from the old jingles and the 30-second commercials, up until today when we get these micro video bursts, whether it be through TikTok or YouTube or just on our phone, and where we believe, actually, there was this train of thought over the last 5 or 7 years that people don't have attention spans anymore. And I argue both sides of the ledger on that one.
Interesting.
Because I myself can, I've had to reacquaint myself with reading again after COVID. And I'm back into it. I'm on Goodreads doing that, personal challenge. How many books are you going to read this year? And I'll top 50 this year. I'll have read 50 books. But it's almost, I've had to retrain my brain after so much technology to focus on a long form something,
right?
And not binge TV and not do this. But sorry, I've been whipping, and I've been answering 20 different questions, not the one that you first asked at the top of this conversation, which was, what was the thought behind the TV dinner book?
Yeah.
And you know what? I can't really, unlike the marketing book where I had a true spark or catalyst, on this one, I just thought, that is the goofiest thing that's ever come out, this heated tray. And then I found out that there was so much science behind it. And I actually, in my dedication at the front of the book, this woman, Betty Cronin, I believe deserves a documentary at least, if not a fictionalized Netflix series. There's not a lot on her, but this young girl, she's a bacteriologist at Swanson. And back to who, invented the TV dinner. I won't give away my book. I think it's a good little mystery that people should read.
It'll be in the show notes.
Oh yeah, there you go. Good. She's, she's a heavy character in this Agatha Christie food science novel. So she's 21. So picture that, 1952, 53. She's 21. She's just out of college, and she's hired in a pretty prestigious job based on her education. All of a sudden, she's got males reporting to her as well. So, we saw all that in Mad Men a decade later, what that was like in the environment in the office and the misogyny and all that. And now we have I've been picturing this woman walking into Swanson, and she's 21, and she's got a big task. Her task is to make sure turkey gravy and stuffing, mashed potatoes with a pat of butter, and peas can be frozen after cooking, and then reheated at the same temperature to come out in the same consistency. Wow. So, it wasn't like they were adding chemicals to it. They were finding ways naturally with those food products for them to be cooked, frozen, and then reheated, not turned to paste, not to be frozen and the other burnt. All of that. She was the alchemist that made sure all of that happened. And I just thought, well, good on her in that environment where she was probably facing ageism, sexism. And now I take a bit of a leap in my research because there's not a lot on Betty Cronin. I did find her obituary, though. And it is the sparsest thing for a woman who rose to become director of the Microwave Institute at Campbell's, because Campbell's later purchased TV dinners. So she worked in the company for 40 years plus.
Yeah.
But in the book, in her obituary, it's written that she, gives thanks to her nieces and nephews, so does not mention being married or having kids of her own. One line to her whole career, which is just incredibly, humble. And then she thanks her good friend, and it's a woman's name, of 40 plus years. So I leap, not too much of a leap, a little bit of a jump to assume that Betty was a lesbian and had a lesbian partner for 40 years. And I thought, what a hero. She's 21 coming into this business. She's getting her sharp elbows out and making sure she's not knocked for being a woman, not knocked for being young. She makes this incredible contribution to the company and frozen food in general. And then I make this assumption, but it's a pretty good one, that she might have also been battling something else in the workplace as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a hero. I want to learn more about her.
I did too. I basically dredged up everything I could with the exception of running down and trying to find her nieces and nephews. I didn't dig any further than that.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. And I think that it speaks well to you that you had this creative itch and you just decided to scratch it and see where it went. I think,
It's funny. I put in the back of the book, and we'll see how this book does. And but it's not about sales and books. Like I'm not. I'm not running off to the Caymans on book sales, and and many people tell you that's the case. It's really to satisfy an itch. It's really to be cathartic. It's really to share and explore yourself. And so I love history. A big military history fan, and but so many of the books are written, very the way our history is taught in school is all wrong too.
Yeah.
I love the new narrative historians that have come out. Cornelius Ryan was like this many years ago. He wrote The Longest Day, and it's not about, and the 7th Division moved 2 miles over to the east, and I'm bored by that.
Yeah.
It's these writers who can take you into the foxhole with the troops, and I'm using the war analogy, but I just like history overall that's really narrative. Yeah. One of my heroes in this is Mark Kurlansky, and probably a lot of your listeners will know him as the author of really offbeat pieces too, but New York Times bestsellers that where I want to get to. He wrote Salt, so the history of salt, and he's such a deep researcher and such a beautiful architect of a page of prose. And then he wrote Cod. He explored cod, oysters, and that blew me away. That was more of it wasn't a full book, and he just brought it to life. Like when the Dutch came to New York and settled New Amsterdam, they were pulling oysters out of the bay around Manhattan that were the size of dinner plates. Wow. And so this imagery comes to mind, right? This is the great thing about a book. People were watching way too much Netflix. Get into a book and let your own imagination, think of right now, just picture, a dinner-sized plate oyster and shucking that baby and how much Tabasco you would need on it. That's the fun of reading.
Yeah. Oh, outstanding. Oh my goodness. So Jeff, what have you got coming up? Actually, no, I want to go back further. Sorry. Okay. Let me jump back to Jeff as I don't know whether you're a young boy. I don't know whether you're a teenager. I don't know what it is that happens, but somewhere along the way you decide you're not going to be a fireman anymore.
Yeah.
You're gonna go to Madison Avenue.
Yeah, lots of life hasn't been by design, and I think that's cool. And actually, I've kind of relearned that lesson over the last 6 or 12 months, that the more you attempt to control, the less satisfaction you have. So I'm opening up the universe to directing me in new places. But I started out fairly entrepreneurial, and then got pulled into the corporate world a bit. And this was about my mid to late 20s. And I landed a gig at Deloitte. Back then it was Deloitte and Touche. And it wasn't on the accounting side, because I'm not that. I'm a liberal arts guy. I was doing, they had all had consulting wings back then, and some still do, these the big accounting firms. So I started and I'm a Winnipeg boy. That's my hometown. Okay. So I started working there, and I started working across the West doing these marketing projects. Then Price Waterhouse, now Price Waterhouse Coopers, snapped me up or gave me an offer. And I remember the offer letter, and I was like, that's all the money in the world. It was just, it was astounding. Woo, this is it. I'm set for life. And for 6 years I was there, and I thought I got a mini MBA every 6 months. I was on projects in Paris. I was, doing, I'm still in Winnipeg, and I'm commuting to Toronto. That was the first thing. What is a Winnipeg boy doing in Toronto when there's plenty of smart people in Toronto?
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, I'm working in projects in New York, and they're like, where are you from? I'm from Winnipeg via Toronto. And they had an attitude in New York and would look down on me as like, what the heck are you doing here?
Yeah.
But all that being said, I've always sort of been in consulting in one form or another. And then I had an amazing opportunity, which took me into marketing. I had just flamed out at a .com around 2000, 2001. I have that star to show.
Yes. My people.
Yeah. Oh, God. Tried a few things. This has been it. I've experimented. And but I was struggling. It was like, funds are tight, everything. A relationship had dissolved at the time. I was like, I'm trying to claw up a smooth mountain. And I had applied. I'd totally forgotten about it, to join a company in Toronto called, It was called Tudhope, and Interbrand, the preeminent brand consulting firm, had bought Tudhope to make it their satellite or their office in Canada, and it would eventually become Interbrand. So within about 3-4 months of this, this .com flameout, I find myself in a condo in Toronto and a new chair in an office, and it was quite the leap. It really was as I look back, but it turned out to be a tremendous one. Within a year, I received a global appointment to head marketing for Interbrand around the world.
Wow.
I made a decent impact in the Toronto business. The training and discipline I got at Price Waterhouse paid off in spades because Interbrand needed that. So I worked for the same boss for 11 years on Madison Avenue. I commuted from Toronto almost every second week for 11 years. And so he was the CEO of Interbrand, Chuck Breimer, a great mentor to me. And he then got elevated to take over DDB. And depending upon the rankings, DDB is one of those madmen firms like Ogilvy and the big ones of the day. He got promoted to CEO, and about a few months later, he asked me over, and I became Chief Communications Officer at DDB worldwide. 12,000 people, $2 billion. But it was the headiness of New York. Like, even though the Mad Men days were long gone, they sort of petered out in the 70s, I was on Madison Avenue. I had a desk at 437 Madison, and that was a big ship to help steer. We'd grown Interbrand almost exponentially. DDB was a different sort. It was at a time, that was 2007 to 12. It was a time when digital agencies were eating the lunch of these bigger traditional firms. And traditional firms were starting to build small digital agencies that hopefully would grow up inside to be the big one. And it was a choppy time, but just a real heady experience. Wow. It was great.
That's rad.
Yeah,
Wow.
It was.
What's your favorite childhood memory?
Wow, I've got a ton. I grew up in a family that allowed you to fall flat on your face, but with all the support in the world. And I fell flat a few times, and I continue to do so in many ways. So that's my training ground. It's really hard to pick out one, but I'm writing a fiction time travel mystery novel right now.
Of course you are.
It's about a guy that, no surprise I'm writing, about a guy that travels back to solve the disappearance of his 10-year-old friend in Winnipeg in 1975. And he doesn't do it deliberately. It just happens to him that all of a sudden he's jettisoned back. I'm like Stephen King. I don't try to explain time travel. It just happens.
Yeah, that's fair.
Take a flyer with me, readers. But one memory was dredged up in that. I had a good friend growing up across the street, actually best friend, and we would play in the backyard. You know how that time G.I. Joes were 10 inches tall. They weren't these little things. We could disappear in the backyard with a G.I. Joe and be in the jungles of Nam and, entirely gone for the entire day. So I'm thinking back, it just stood out recently because I'm stealing that memory and I'm embedding it in the book.
Love it.
And it's making it more authentic and real. So I can't say it was the best one, but it's the most recent one, and it's certainly the most graphic one. It's like it's happening to me yesterday.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that, and I love that for my kids too. When we raised them on a river valley where they could go and disappear into the woods for the day. And, because I grew up that same way. I grew up just outside of Toronto, and we would disappear into the woods. We'd be gone. Home by dinner was the name of the game.
Yeah. I remember my father had a very deep voice, and it was when the lights would come on, the street lights would come on, and that was supposedly our clue, but we would stretch it. So, 10 minutes later, I'd hear his booming voice, Jeffrey, get in here, But you would play outside, and it's kind of back to the TV dinner book about what's changed in the family. And it really is ritual is missing, right? Ritual and some structure and all of that. Like, I'm not, saying that there's not some really interesting things happening in the new family dynamic, but I think there's some structural things that are gone, and technology has been a big impediment in parenting, and I think that's just true.
Yeah, Fair enough. What happens next for you? Like, what's going on? Do you have any mergers coming up? Do you have any big business deals? Like, what does life
Well,
look like for
this
Jeff?
was so cool today. I signed, not signed, but agreed verbally on the phone. So knock on wood, for a new ghostwriting project, which is
Excellent.
absolutely fantastic. I'm thinking about making this TV dinners book a series. And I've just been sort of flexing that a bit. I'm really attracted to mid-century, mid-century modern, even the aesthetic, the Mad Men era of furniture. So I'm thinking about the next one wouldn't be on TV dinners. It would be how people lived in their homes. And I would love to cover like sunken living rooms, water beds.
So many things.
Lava lamps in the teenager's room, and you go to the closet through a beaded curtain. There's kind of all of that, but and open plan kitchens were big in the 60s. That was revolutionary, right? To go from a very closeted kitchen space to a bigger space. And I'm thinking about bungalows and how garages took place. Like all of this is a neat evolution in how people lived. And then, of course, like the TV dinners, the TV itself was such a force. It was a force too in how people designed their homes. And we saw all the changes in COVID. Before people, might have had a man cave or mini movie theater, but how people were basically equipping their homes to be work, play, and life. Everything all in one, and that just ain't healthy.
That's so amazing. I love it. What is the Jeff? I'm assuming I'm going to take a leap of faith here that you go for walks because you live in a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah,
and I would imagine in my mind's eye, I see Jeff like walking along and he smiles at his neighbors and he probably waves but then at some point he drifts off and he's thinking in his head, boy, I sure wish the world knew this. And what is that you wish the world knew? Like, what's the thing that just, I don't know, does it keep you up at night? Does it inspire you to take the next step?
That's a fantastic question, and you're really putting me on the spot. First off, I'm a bit of a hypocrite. A lot of my walks, I'm plugged in. I'm listening to a podcast or a book, which is a sin, given what I espouse. So I'm a sinner. But when I think it's of recent for me because there's been a lot of change with everyone, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the world, that I think what I would love to communicate to people is it's all right not to live in the past and it's all right not to live in the future. So when I do this deliberately now, it was taught to me by a friend on a walk, make 5 observations.
Cool.
It really is. So, and I was naturally doing this before, and then I got, tempted by the technology temptress, and I would, bring my phone and that. But if you happen to forget your phone or deliberately lock it away, and it doesn't even have to be a nature hike. Like some downtown walks are just absolutely fantastic, in the cities you're in, they can observe so much. But I remember being on a hike here in a local municipality, so close to Mont Tremblant, Quebec, where I observed, and I'm not really good at this, but I can tell the difference in mushrooms. I saw 17 different mushrooms on a walk, and I just appreciated every one of them, the dew glistening on them, the shape of them. One was like a teacup, and it had water in it. And I did have my phone, so I was taking pictures. It was tough to get away from that. Yeah. But actually, so it wasn't about 17 different mushrooms. That's one thing. The one thing was 17 different mushrooms. What's the next thing that you see, right? Like a tree that's supporting another tree. And then you get metaphors pop up in your mind. If you're a writer at all creative or a painter or whatever, all of a sudden you have inspiration. And there's so many lessons in returning to simplicity. But observation and curiosity hopefully are 2 skills that will never leave me.
I love that. That is so great. What's your now you say that you got good reads, you read a lot of books. What's your 2 questions?
Sure.
What's on your nightstand right now and or your coffee table?
Yep.
And follow-up question is, what's your favorite book if you could pick one?
Yeah, that's a great one. So my sister just sent me, and thank you, Sandra, Shackleton's, the story of Shackleton, the Endurance. And I know of a woman at Harvard who wrote the business takeaways from Shackleton's adventure. Nancy Keogh, I'm going to get her name wrong, Keogh, something like that. Anyway, Nancy actually lectured to me twice in a business program, and she was writing the book at the time and got me really excited about it. So I felt like I had, known the story, but there is this it's not the business aspect of it. It's what Shackleton actually endured on his adventure. So I've got that one on the nightstand, and I'm really excited about it. The favorite book of all time. It's so hard, like I could go from Stephen King to, you name it.
Sure.
Yeah. Back to Cornelius Ryan. But there's a Pete Hamill book. He was a New York grizzled journalist who I happened to share 2 bar stools with at the Oyster Bar one time, and I didn't know it was him. And we began talking, and it's great. And now it's so funny you put me on the spot. I'm going to blank on the name of the book, but it's a novel.
Yeah,
and it's about time travel in a way. It's about a guy who gets knocked on the head by some sort of witch or indigenous shaman. I can't remember specifically. And if he leaves the island, he dies, the island of Manhattan. So he basically experiences Manhattan from, for 200 years up until just past 9/11. That's where Pete took the book. And for some reason, I've got Limitless in my head. That's not the right title. That's the title of that silly movie.
Yeah.
But it's like Timeless or something like that. Apologies, but
we'll find it and put it in the show notes. Yeah, we'll figure it out and we'll put it in the show notes.
I feel terrible. I've been so articulate and remember everything up until this point, but it's Forever. It just came to me. There we go. I'm still batting 1,000.
Jeff's back, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the synapse is fired on that one. It's called Forever by Pete Hamill, and it's just wonderful. This is a guy that really used to write on everything about New York and Manhattan, which I'm fascinated with. The 11 years I spent commuting there, I took in everything Manhattan I could. And so I love his book. I love the notion of how people adapt to changing circumstances. And that's why we enjoy time travel. It's not about sci-fis and blasters. It's really it's the ultimate fish out of water story, really.
Right. Yeah. Outstanding. Oh, okay. Last huge question. It's going to be big.
Okay.
Favorite place to travel?
Travel.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. I haven't traveled much lately, and I used to travel a heck of a lot. I was adding it up. I'm well over 40 countries visited, and that's largely due to work. I really credit Pricewaterhouse, now PwC, Interbrand, and DDB, and some of them are silly trips. Like I remember we would have, we're doing a regional meeting with DDB. So I was in Turkey. Yeah, great. I was in Istanbul for 2 days, in a Hyatt. But that was on the list.
Yeah, it counts.
So, there's been some real cool ones. I've been very fortunate. I've been to China a number of times, actually for significant chunks of time too. So I really enjoyed that experience.
Wow.
And there's some really glaring ones that I have not visited. I'm not super drawn to it, but Japan would be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Never been to Australia, so I've never made it that far around the world, but been to China. I'm Ukrainian, and I really have a Ukrainian background. That's what Swystun means, whistler, actually. But I'm third, albeit fourth, or maybe even arguably fourth generation, and always said, I've got to get there. And I thought I'd get there with work. DDB had an office there.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the managing director. I thought something might pull me there. And I don't know what was holding me up. So a personal vow is, once it's safe, once things are cleaned up, that will be absolutely on the bucket list.
Oh, that's good.
And then there's a funny place I have never been. And once again, no draw, but people always say, God, with all of your business travels and all that, it's a city in America. I've never been to Las Vegas.
Oh.
And once again, I'd probably go for the shows, not a gambler or anything like that. And probably I write in the TV dinner book about a couple of the buffets there. I go off on a tangent. So it might be to visit that. But I always get reamed out by people. You've never been to Vegas, and it's funny.
I've been a couple times, and only accidentally. I've never gone there on purpose. Like it's been a layover. It's been driving through to somewhere else. Not a fan. Like, and I'm not saying that Vegas is awful. So please, don't send me letters. But it's, I don't know. There's so many more interesting places. I'm not a fan of the, loudness and the brashness,
right?
And the
fakeness, right? Yeah. I think I think Vegas has a purpose, and people will probably put gambling at the top of that, but I think it's just become a quirky mecca, and that's what it is. But it's just so funny. People make assumptions that based on so much business travel that I would have attended a conference or something.
Yeah. That sounds fair.
Yep.
100%. Jeff, this has been amazing.
Wow.
I've had so much fun, and I've learned so much, and I can't wait to buy your TV dinner book.
Well, let me send you a copy, and so that's great. I'll do that, and hopefully the listeners will be interested in it. I got to tell you that it breaks down to being a pop, social, and almost business history. So I think it's like there's 5 trays to this book, people, and you're going to enjoy one of the trays of food. So pick it up.
Right, and there's pudding. Is there pudding?
Yeah, there's always the dessert. Yeah, there is the famous Libby Land dinners from the 70s that were, I think, informed McDonald's Happy Meals for kids, because they were basically, it was a pop-up box. It became a toy, the TV dinner box from Libby Land, and they always included like 2 desserts in it, and you knew where the kids were going first. They weren't going to that macaroni or cheese and that reheated wiener. They were going to the chocolate pudding.
Oh, man. Outstanding, Jeff. This has been so much fun. Thank you for joining me on the Rebel Rebel.
Well, real pleasure to be here, and thank you. And I look forward to sending you the book and hearing your thoughts.
Me too. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Michael Dargie, and this has been the Rebel Rebel Podcast. It's a podcast for creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. And hey, if you're a rebel or you know a rebel, why don't you head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and fill out our guest request form. We'll get back to you within 24 hours, and maybe we can share your story with the world. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and thanks so much for listening. Until next time.